wild Fred VanVleet trade proposal has Raptors fans split about whether or not they'd accept the deal from the Chicago Bulls. So we'll discuss that, as well as Jakob Poeltl has once again been linked to the Toronto Raptors in a new report. And Doug Smith came out with an article breaking down Masai Ujiri's sort of vision up and coming for this trade deadline. And Justin Champagnie has spoken out with his frustrations with the Toronto Raptors coaching staff for not giving him enough minutes. So a lot of news to break down. Without further ado, let's jump straight into it. Hello everybody, Ben Maltz here at the Raptors side, just breaking down the latest Toronto Raptors news, and we have a lot of things to discuss. So the first thing we're taking a look at is a wild trade rumor between the Raptors and the Chicago Bulls. Now, these are two organizations that had high expectations coming into this year. They have star talent, some guys that are vets, mixed with some young players, but with hopes of, making a push this year in the loaded Eastern Conference, and neither team has really lived up to expectations so far this season, and both teams are under 500, and there's a lot of eyes on both the Bulls and the Raptors in terms of what they're going to do for this upcoming trade deadline. And now the Ringer came out and they whipped up a trade machine of themselves, and this rumored proposed trade, given everything that they've discussed, they broke down the situations between both teams, but has been making the rounds around Toronto Raptors Nation, and it has fans split about whether or not they'd accept a deal. So I'll highlight the package that has Raptors fans, Bulls fans all up in roar, but essentially they're saying, what if the Bulls, a team that is generally desperate and is also in need of a healthy floor general, decide they can't wait any longer for Lonzo Ball's knee injury to recover. And then they offer Patrick Williams, Coby White, and Derrick Jones Jr. for Fred VanVleet. That's a fun one to consider, but if Toronto's up and down play continues and Chicago's brain breaks, could it potentially happen? So that's where the route, it's popped up around Twitter and Reddit a bunch, but that's where the sort of rumor train has popped up. And it is an interesting one, and your feelings about it sort of reflect how you envision the season going for the Toronto Raptors, because I think, honestly, people have been calling me a Fred VanVleet stan and hating on me in the comment section below for not calling Fred VanVleet absolutely garbage and not wanting to give him up for the likes of Mo Bamba. I think that's absolutely an absurd take, an extreme section, but Fred VanVleet was an all-star this time last year. Right, his value hasn't fallen off that much of a cliff. His play, sure, it's more inefficient this season, and he's a ball, he has the ball in his hands a bunch, so it's not as free flowing. But Fred VanVleet is not that bad, guys. He is not that bad. Like, he's definitely not been great. He definitely can improve in certain areas, but I'm seeing the same amount of criticism for him in last night's game where he dropped close to a 40 piece, right? Like, sure, he could swing the ball a little bit more, but he had an efficient 40-piece in a game where really, with the exception of Scottie Barnes, no one really else had their game going remarkably. So I'm not taking all of the Fred VanVleet standard, and I've been bagging on him more than I ever have. And I've never been like, as standing of Fred VanVleet as I have guys like Kyle Lowry and stuff in the past, but people have to lay off the extreme hate on Fred VanVleet. I'm making that known now. That'll probably get me more hate in the comment section, but I think it's gone to another level. But to digress back into this trade rumor, right? If you think, the Toronto Raptors should go in the direction of more of a rebuild and stuff, right? You might be more inclined to accept this deal, right? You look at what the Chicago Bulls are essentially offering back for Fred VanVleet. And the main piece is Patrick Williams, who this season's averaging 9.5 points, 4 rebounds, 1 assist, 1 block, but is a player that's dealt with some injuries and dealt with, hasn't really gotten to the rhythm the season for the Chicago Bulls, but the really encouraging sort of stat there is 44% behind the three-point line and can play elite defense. So with the Chicago Bulls sort of roster construction, he hasn't had an opportunity to really thrive, and maybe the Raptors think in their development system they could bring him in. He's openly spoke out in interviews saying that he believes he can be a superstar in the NBA, so Patrick Williams will be the key return in this potential trade package, and then you're also getting a guy in Coby White who has basically regressed. He was a former lottery pick, but has continued to regress with lack of opportunities down there in Chicago. But 8 points, 2 rebounds, 2 assists, not a lot of minutes. His three-point shot isn't that great either, but can slash a little bit. Yeah, not the most efficient of a point guard scorer, but is an NBA caliber player. So you'd be getting him in return, and then on top of it, you're getting a role guy in Derrick Jones Jr., who is, again, plays solid defense, is a solid athlete. Not much of a three-point shooter himself, but the real return in this package is Patrick Williams. So three guys that personally, when I saw it, I was underwhelmed. And I was a little bit surprised that Raptors fans, not really, people were hyped about a Cole Anthony and Mo Bamba deal, which I won't rant about that any further. But, you know, Patrick Williams, depending how you view him as a star, he could be a young player paired alongside, you know, his Florida State fellow alumnus from Florida State, Scotty Barnes, right? They could be a cool dynamic duo. They're both fourth picks, getting some high lottery talent. Maybe in the Raptors development system, you get the most out of Kobe White and Patrick Williams. But again, even with Fred VanVleet's struggles this season, he's still a guy that is averaging 18 points per game, averaging 4 rebounds, 6 assists per night. His three-point shooting is still bad, 32% and stuff. But again, the sample size, he's not going to be that bad of a three-point shooter so far. Like, as the season goes along, it just can't happen. It can't happen. You look at Fred VanVleet, we've watched this guy for about 5 years. Those numbers are bound to go up at some point, at least the three-point shooting percentages. And he's really the cog, the leader of this team. And you're really trading him for, you know, unpredictable asset in Patrick Williams. I know I'm going to get hate because I've seen what people have responded to comments on this trade, but I want to make my voice known. That's why I'm leading this video with it. But unless the Raptors go full out tank mode and we get a pick or something from the Chicago Bulls, maybe Fred VanVleet is a free agent. You got to worry about the money situation from that. So I can see where people are coming from in that route. But talent-wise, you're taking a big risk on Patrick Williams coming back to the Raptors. So I don't know. Let me know what you guys think. I'd probably decline it. I want something more for Fred VanVleet. But maybe, I don't know what his value is at this point. But personally, that's why I'd hold on to Fred. Don't sell low on your top guys. It's a bad look. Kills the vibes in your locker room, but that's just my take on that front there. People will roast me, I know, I get it. But the next thing we're discussing is another Toronto Raptors trade rumor, and this is an actual report, once again linking Jakob Poeltl to the Toronto Raptors. Now, we discussed a couple weeks ago how, or maybe a week ago, I'm not sure when the video came out, about how reports came out that the Toronto Raptors were really going hard after pursuing Jakob Poeltl, and they were competing with the Golden State Warriors. So that report has essentially been verified and backed by Jake Fisher today, as he's come out and basically said the Toronto Raptors have interest in bringing Jakob Poeltl after trading him to the San Antonio Spurs in 2018 as a part of the Kawhi Leonard deal. Fisher noted also that the Chicago Bulls have had internal conversations about the 27-year-old center prior to last year's trade deadline, and the rival teams are closely monitoring them as a potential seller. So there's two teams, right? The Warriors were obviously named is interest in Jakob Poeltl a couple weeks ago. The Raptors were amongst that, but now the Bulls, as we've talked about at the start of this video, are looking to make deals themselves, are also in the mix for a Jakob Poeltl trade. So, you know, for people that don't remember his stats, aren't that overwhelmingly great, right? He's not putting up some insane numbers, but 13 points, 10 rebounds, 4 assists, and really solid defense, right? Only 1 block per game, 1 steal per game, but positionally is really solid, just getting in front of guys, being a solid rim protector, you know, in the same way Marc Gasol was. Didn't get a lot of block shots, but could use his body to be big, verticality, and get people to jump into him and stuff. So Jakob Poeltl will be a great fit on that front, would help our defense, right? When Christian Coloco's locked in, we see how much better the Raptors defense can be, but obviously he's a second-round draft pick as a rookie, and centers usually take a little bit of time to develop, so Coloco's not there just yet. So Poeltl will be nice to fit on that front, but if we're making any big swings, if we're making any big trades, and we have to potentially give up Gary or a really valuable piece to get Jakob Poeltl, I'd probably rather use those assets elsewhere to acquire more shooting, especially if we're giving up Gary Trent Jr. You're only shooting yourself in the foot even more because we're giving up the star boy who is our best shooter, and people were saying in the comment section below why it doesn't make sense for us to trade Gary in the last video, which I agree with, right? It doesn't make sense to get rid of your best shooter if you're not bringing some elite shooting back onto your squad. So, you know, the Raptors need to fix their shooting problem, so I'm not trading Gary there. But the rumor deal was Khem Birch, Flynn, and pick maybe, right? If we can get that happening, then I'm all for bringing in Jakob Poeltl, even though it's another contract we have to worry about come next summer. So let me know if you guys would like to see a deal for Jakob Poeltl. But the next thing we got is an interesting report on the Raptors' current approach to trade season, as Doug Smith came out with a nice deep dive in terms of Masai Ujiri's perspective as we head closer and closer to trade season. As December 15th, the day of recording today, a bunch of basically the rest of the league, everyone that signed contracts this summer, they are now eligible to trade. So this is where the rumors start to really pick up. The time of year we really inch closer to trade season and can see potential moves going down, right? And Doug Smith gave us some insight in terms of what we can expect from the Toronto Raptors front office. And they're saying that league sources contend the Raptors are looking for solutions to the problems that the roster has, but much of that is just the usual course of doing business. They've known since before the season began that shooting might be an issue, and it's become a very serious one. It's accelerated their accelerate their search, but it doesn't mean trades are going to magically happen. So Doug's basically saying, the Raptors know the shooting issue, probably defense is on their mind as well, and while they've accelerated their hopes in trying to solve this problem, they're not just going to throw random deals at the wall and hope things happen. They're not desperate. They're not going to sell low on a bunch of guys. So that's what Doug Smith is referring to on that front. And he went on to say that what's just as significant to management as if players are still getting along, whether they're still buying into the way Nick Nurse runs things, and whether the group still works. Right? A way to tell this is to parse the public musings of players and coaches. No one's ever going to get the full, unadulterated truth, but these guys are pros at answering questions and without revealing too much. But there's a way to read between the lines, to look at body language, to find the meaning behind the phrases uttered. So far, things aren't great, but they're not horrible. So basically, along with the on-the-court problems the Toronto Raptors have been having, Masai Ujiri has to sort of feel out how this team is sort of there mentally. And there's been a lot of speculations about does Nick Nurse still, run this locker room? Are people still bought into his style of coaching, his approach to things? And even the best coaches' voices can get wrung out a little bit of time. Sometimes a move fixes that. Some people have called for Nick Nurse to be fired. I am not in that boat, but that's what people have been calling for, and Doug Smith directly addresses that in this report, but also how players, they're sort of feeling about their games, feeling about their minutes, feeling about just the Toronto Raptors being in a losing situation. And Pascal seems to be coming at it with the right approach. He said all the right things and doesn't have those underlining weird comments that we know some superstars occasionally have. I've praised him on recent videos for that. Fred VanVleet can sometimes have some subtle undertones that he's a little bit frustrated, but never come out and say it directly. Scotty's had some weird comments, but overall, I think they've all been solid. No one seems to be that disgruntled in post-game interviews. The body language on the court and just lack of chemistry feels like we have on the offensive defensive end. That's probably the most discouraging thing I've seen as a Raptors fan this season. So, we'll see how all that plays out, but definitely keep an eye out for that. Looking at post-game interviews, seeing what people say, seeing what we recap on these videos, because that's going to be very telling, as Doug Smith says, about how the Raptors' direction is going to be set going forward. But the final thing we're discussing in this video is Justin Champagnie being frustrated with his minutes, or should I say lack of minutes? Should I say 0 minutes at all? Because our guy Champagnie Poppy, while he made the roster, while he was a big topic of discussion coming into the season, it feels like we haven't heard anything about him, heard anything from him, barely seen him on the court since he ended up coming back for the Raptors, making the roster at preseason. And Justin Champagnie had a big game. He's putting on some big performances in the G League, and he posted this to his story. Basically, after he scored 34 points, 9 rebounds, and 5 assists, posted on a story on Instagram saying, "Free me," and saying that he's locked up. And obviously, Champagnie was a pretty main cog in the rotation last season for the Toronto Raptors, and he's been getting nothing. No chances, no runs, no breaths on the court in any meaningful time this season. And that wasn't the case for him in his rookie year. Yes, he's dealt with some injuries, but he's a guy that, in theory, he's a solid shooter, right? He struggled in preseason and stuff, but can knock down the three and is really solid on defense and gets a lot of rebounds. So I'm surprised that he hasn't gotten an opportunity. Him and Jeff Doughton have really been glued to the bench, and while other players haven't been playing well off the bench for the Toronto Raptors, I don't think the solution is just to run our top 7 guys 40 minutes a night. I think Nick Nurse should be at least giving guys like Justin Champagnie, giving Jeff Doughton Jr. the reign or the opportunity to play a few minutes and not just 4 minutes at a time. Like, give them 10, 12 minutes every game or two if you're not planning on playing Banton or Flynn or some of these dudes. But I could be crazy for saying that. However, I don't like the public calling out of Nick Nurse or something. You go to the team directly, and it feels like this year it's been brought up how there's been a lot of leaks amongst the Toronto Raptors front office, as well as players' frustrations coming out about Masai Ujiri coming out and having a private conversation with Scotty Barnes, giving some hard truths, which is something we never hear coming out from the Raptors front office. And now Justin Champagnie directly complaining on Instagram about not getting minutes. Like, it's not the best look. So while I do agree Champagnie should be given an opportunity with our struggling bench, it's not something I want to see him doing, complaining on IG. So that's my take. Let me know what you guys think about everything that's gone on. You guys are the best for making this far. Also, if you made this far and you want to support the channel, want to support the videos, definitely check out CoolBet. They've been sponsoring the videos in recent weeks. And if you sign up with the sports book down below, right, you'll be entered in some giveaways we're going to be having the next couple of weeks. We've given away Lakers Raptors tickets, and they're the best, most trusted sports book across Canada. You can get all the lines, bet for the Toronto Raptors, because I'm big on them potentially returning or bouncing back into form. But you guys are the best. I'm signing out. Cheers.